In the 1950s, we were very curious as to how stuff worked and wanted to try different things. These curiosities included making homemade root beer. Carl found a recipe somewhere, maybe it was an Argosy magazine, or Life, or Post, or True, or even Popular Mechanics. In those days, we received all those magazines at some time or another. This recipe had to be modified to fit what we could find lying around or were able to purchase in a store. When I use quotation marks, I am quoting what Carl wrote several years ago. Make sure you have understanding parents. We bought a bottle of root beer extract, about the size of a bottle for blowing bubbles. It could be found at all grocery stores. Got a 5-gallon container, added all extract and 5 pounds of sugar and a cake of brewer's yeast, which smelled very much like regular yeast. It had to be kept in an ice box and came in a small rectangular cake about 2 inches long by 1 inch. Mixture stirred and left in warm place at least a week. Next, it was siphoned off into beer or pop bottles with about 1 inch of space and capped with a bottle capper, which we had. You needed a box of bottle caps, which were available at most stores, all located together on store shelves. It was very important not to suck up any yeast residue which had largely settled to bottom. That's why you should siphon it out, as this process did not disturb the yeast unless you placed the hose too close to bottom. If you tried to scoop it out, you invariably stirred yeast up from bottom. Problem: you needed a small clean hose to siphon. The yeast would continue to act on any remaining sugars in bottle. This was not good, as too much carbon dioxide would be created and bottle cap would blow. Chances are we did not have a food-grade piece of hose. It was okay stuff and had plenty of fizz, but tended to have a yeasty taste. If we had made a lot of batches, we could have adjusted yeast and time to let batch set. As it aged in bottles, yeast residue settled in bottle also, and it was best to not disturb that. Root beer can be bottled right away and let to carbonate in bottle. It should be cooled after about a week to help prevent blowing. Yes, bottles did explode or caps flew off. 4 gallons of water was used. Bottler was under the house. There were several of them about. The key was to use right amount of yeast. Less would be better. It would just take longer to develop. We were supposed to check a bottle to test carbonation level. When just right, the cooling will stop or slow carbonation. We used saved pop and beer bottles, which we scrubbed out and boiled. We probably had a capper when we left Sand Island. Most recipes for root beer called for less root beer extract and less yeast than what we used. We stored the capped bottles under Mom and Dad's bed, as it had a higher clearance for the bottles than the other beds in the home. We must have siphoned off too much yeast, since several of the bottles blew their caps and left a sticky, gooey mess under the bed. Note: making beer was much the same, except you bought a container of malt extract, which I believe was made by Pabst in the 50s. It came in about a pint container similar to that of Karo syrup at the time, with a pry-off top.